Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President, very much. Mr. President, today I rise to advocate to my colleagues in the Senate for my Small Business Liberation Act. And I do so with Leader Schumer and Senator Moreno, who have each already spoken on this very important issue. Here's what the bill would do. The bill would give relief from President Trump's disastrous, destructive, small business killing tariffs that have been turning Main Street into Pain Street all over our country for the last 7 weeks. I would also provide, with my bill, certainty to the constant whiplash and chaos that is President Trump's tariff policies by exempting small businesses from the baseline 10% tariffs and the tariffs that have been on a 90-day pause since April 9th. So let me just explain what I'm talking about. On April 2nd, President Trump imposed a 10% tariff on pretty much the whole world. In other words, a 10% tax on anything coming into the country, 10%. He also imposed an additional, called reciprocal tariff, on April 2nd as well. And those tariffs, for example, were an additional 20% on the EU, or an additional, we'll just say 32% on Fiji, for whatever reason. So that was an incredible additional tax on top of the 10% tax, which he imposed on the same day. So on April 9th, the president said, well, we'll wait 90 days on those additional tariffs on the EU for 20%, the 32% for Fiji, the 24% additional for Japan. We'll put that aside, but we're going to keep the 10% on. Now, for a big company, maybe they can figure that out. They can ride that out to 10%. However, if you are a small business in our country, and all of a sudden there's a new 10% tax you have to pay on all of those goods which you're bringing into our country, and then there's a kind of a sword of Damocles sitting out there as well, that there could be, in July, which is only 6 weeks away, an additional 20% if those products come in from Europe, well, you're going to have a chilling effect that is placed on your business decisions, without question. They don't have the leeway to be able to make the kind of riskier decisions that perhaps a big business could, to just ride through all these tariffs. So all across every main street in our country, these small businesses are getting paralyzed by the Trump actions. And again, we're going to start with this. There's a 10% tax already in place right now since April 2nd on every good coming into our country. So this is a very dangerous place to put the small businesses of our country. And even as the vast majority of small businesses are seeing massive tariff-induced cost hikes, this administration is offering exemptions for billion-dollar corporations. If you can get a dinner invitation to Mar-a-Lago, like the heads of Apple and Google, you can secure an exemption for your industry. Now, in almost every instance, that is preceded by a big multi-million-dollar contribution to some entity that the Trump administration would like you to give that money to. And then Apple's out. Google's out. They're not any longer affected by the tariffs. But no one on Main Street can afford to go to Mar-a-Lago to give the president $1 million. That probably exceeds the total worth of their business. So that's the problem with where we are. And by the way, it's also why the National Chamber of Commerce says that small businesses should get an exemption. It's not me. It's the National Chamber of Commerce that says that they should get an exemption. And 97% of all companies that do business on an international basis are small businesses. And they constitute 30% of all trade. The National Chamber of Commerce is saying they should all be exempted. That's what my bill does. It says exempt those 97% of all businesses that constitute 30% of trade from these tariffs, from the 10% tariff, from the upcoming 6 weeks from now, upwards of 20%, 30%, 40% more tariffs that are being imposed on countries around the world, while we're waiting for the president to negotiate bilateral agreements with each one of these entities. Well, so far, after a month and a half, he's up to exactly one agreement with the United Kingdom. That's it. He's got dozens and dozens to go and no time on the clock. And that's what small businesses look at. They're looking up at the clock. They're saying, how long can I last? I survive week to week. I survive month to month. I can't afford to be paying these tariffs. I'm wondering if there's a new tariff which is coming in. And all across our country, these numbers are unbelievable. In Massachusetts, we have 7 million people. We have 700,000 small businesses. Well, the same thing is true for the country. There are 330 million Americans, and there's 33 million small businesses. There is a small business in America for every 10 people. And that person right now is looking on with fear that their future has a cloud over it. And those small businesses, they account for 2 out of every 3 jobs added to our economy in the last 25 years. They are our engine of growth. So I've heard from small businesses all across Massachusetts, all across our country, about how they're forcing those businesses to lay off employees, scale back benefits, or even shut their doors in some cases. And I spoke with Brandell Randolph, founder of 1854 Cycling Company, an electric bike manufacturer based in Massachusetts. And here's what Brandell told me. He shared the story that his company finally, after years of work, recovered from the $45 million which they lost during COVID, only to now be forced to decide whether or not they can weather this new tariff disaster hanging over their head. So they moved from COVID to tariffs. None of this having been in any way instigated by the small businesses of our country. They don't have anything to do with it. It just keeps coming into their lives. And the messages from 1854 and other small businesses across the country is clear. These tariffs are going to threaten to put them out of business. Small businesses are not Democrat. They're not Republican. This should not be a partisan issue. And I am disappointed that President Trump continues to ignore the outrage and the opposition of his irrational and ill-advised tariff policy. It's time for the Senate to stand up and exempt small businesses in our country. There's a trade war going on. We should allow small businesses not to be drafted into this war because they are the ones that will be the casualty. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Finance be discharged from further consideration of S. 1593, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that the bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President?
Senator from Ohio.
Reserving the right to object, and if my Democrat colleague could just yield for a very brief question for clarification, I think for those listening, how do you define a small business?
Well, a small business is defined in the Small Business Administration definitions, and those are the businesses which we would exempt, and it can be different depending upon the industry or its status. But in general, what we're using is the definition used by the Small Business Administration.
And just for clarification for my colleague, that's actually 500 employees or less. So I think when we're talking about small businesses, just want to clarify that we're talking about 500 employee businesses. So first of all, I also want to absolutely thank my colleague for caring about small businesses. Certainly as a small business owner up until 4 months ago. I think we should have much more passion here in this chamber around small businesses. So I truly commend you for that. I also commend you in a very big and meaningful way for the vote you took 25 years ago, where you voted against giving China normalization status with the United States. I think that was a courageous vote. You were on the right side of history. That disastrous situation has led China to grow its GDP from 1.2 trillion back then when you voted to 25 trillion today. So the fact that you went against some of your colleagues and took that vote shows that you're somebody who's independently minded and understands what businesses go through. Truly, truly commend you for that, because there is no worse bill in American history than that act. That act destroyed companies, not just in all over America, but specifically, Mr. President, in your state and in my state. We see it every day, don't we? When we go on a campaign trail, when we're driving around Missouri or we're driving around Ohio, we see the remnants of companies that once existed. But let's talk about how we can liberate small businesses, and maybe we can agree on these plans. Number one, in the 2017 tax reform, the 2017 Tax and Jobs Cuts Act. What's interesting to me as a small business owner is that very large companies had their taxes made permanent, but it was small businesses that those tax rates expire. In fact, they expire this year. And the bill that we're looking to advance here in the Senate is a bill that would make those tax rates permanent. Let me just repeat that. We're not looking to cut taxes, because that's what you hear from my colleagues quite a bit. We're looking to make the 2017 tax reform permanent, not for big companies, not for the massive companies that are headquartered in Massachusetts, but for the small businesses in Ohio and Missouri and other places around the country that are going to see a massive increase in their taxes if we don't take action. To put it in numbers, it's a $4 trillion tax increase for businesses. So we're going to liberate small businesses. Join me in calling for the 2017 tax reform to be made permanent. Let's reform onerous regulations, especially in the banking sector. If you were a small business over the last 4 years, it was really hard to get access to banking because banks were basically shutting out small businesses from lending. The big banks kept getting bigger. Community banks, which is what small businesses rely on, were getting absolutely tortured. We need better energy policies. What that means is certainly not banning coal, which is important in my state, natural gas, which we have 1,000 years of reserve. And I've offered to my colleague, we'll build a big, beautiful pipeline right to Massachusetts. You'll never need energy again from Canada or any other place. You can get it right from Ohio. Better workforce policies. Ending the incredible amount of onerous over-litigation. Those types of policies will liberate small businesses. How do I know it? Because I've been a small business owner my entire life. And when we're talking about, so let's talk about the subject at hand and tariffs. Tariffs are exactly intended to help these kinds of companies. When a Mexican company came in and bought Republic Steel in Canton, Ohio, first thing they did was take all the equipment that was valuable, shipped it to Mexico, massively laid off the employees, sucked all the cash out of the business, and left a 258-acre environmental disaster in the heart of Canton, Ohio. Now that same steel is made in Mexico, and they wanted to ship that steel into the United States completely tariff-free. What was the impact on small businesses around that steel mill? The restaurants, the hairdressers, the grocery stores, the doctors, the dentists who relied on those employees. Devastation reigned. In Lordstown, Ohio, we once had a General Motors facility that employed 10,000 people, 6 million square feet, made the highest quality products of any facility in America. Production was shifted to Mexico. Now that facility sits basically idle. What was the impact of the small businesses in Lordstown, Ohio? Total and complete devastation. So while I appreciate my colleagues' desire, I really, really do. I've had a chance to meet you in your office. I think you're a good man. I really say that with total earnestness on my part. But let's actually liberate small businesses. Let's give them certainty on taxes. Let's keep their tax rates permanent, just like the big guys got. Why do the big guys get permanency and the little guys who don't have access to the halls of Congress, why do they get the tax rates to go up? Let's give them better energy policies that allow them to have energy costs down. Let's give them better workforce policy. Let's end the reign of terror of litigation that hits small businesses, that drives up insurance costs. And let's give them good workforce policies. And let's unite as a country as President Trump tries to undo, Senator, for what you tried to do 25 years ago. 25 years ago, you wanted this country to stand up to China and say, no, we will not give you normalization, because if we do, you'll destroy our economy, and they have. Let's rally around President Trump. It's been just over 100 and some odd days. He's trying to reverse 25 years of bad behavior. We should be in this chamber saying, look, go out and do that, negotiate. We have your back. Fight for America. Fight for American workers. Fight for American small businesses. That's the message other countries need to hear. They shouldn't be hearing from this chamber that we're not united as Americans and making the best deal for American workers. And with that, and therefore, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to say that I appreciate the comments of the gentleman from Ohio, but here's the bottom line. This isn't just about China. The president hasn't targeted just China. He hasn't explained his just China strategy. He's imposed these tariffs all across the world. All across the world, every country. And yeah, the legislation that we have, it doesn't touch the steel tariffs that are imposed. We don't touch those. They can stay in place. We don't touch them. But here's the bottom line. You can't make silk for U.S. ties in the United States. You can't grow coffee in the United States. I could go on and on and on and on and on, product after product after product that's sold on Main Street in America. Putting a 10% tariff on, and then on top of that, a potential additional 20%, 30%, 40%. Well, it's not going to do anything for the person on Main Street with the small business. It's just going to make it almost impossible for them to import those goods that they need to sell in their stores on every Main Street in America. That's what they're saying to us. And this 10% tariff is still going to stay on. We're only 6 weeks from having the sword of Damocles of 20% more for the EU and countries all around the world, Japan, Israel, you name it, India. It's just dozens and dozens of countries, that aren't China. But there's no plan. The president's making it up as he goes along. But the people who are going to suffer are going to be the small business people. If you import toys, and there's maybe 20 different countries from which you import your toys to put on the shelves of your stores, on Main Street everywhere, and then parents can go in to buy the present for their child, I just think it's unrealistic. The president's saying, well, maybe the kids can get by with $3 instead of 30. No, that's not how it's going to work. The store's going out of business. The store has a certain predictable business model in terms of how much revenue they're going to have per year based upon what they can import. If the president had a plan, well, I'd like to hear it, but I don't. I haven't heard him talk about how he is ultimately going to get a deal with dozens of countries in 6 weeks. There's no likelihood of that happening. But a small business person can't take that risk. So that's why, again, this short-term pain that the president keeps talking about for long-term gains, well, honestly, in the short run, these businesses they're going under, the small businesses. And there may be some posthumous vindication of the president's theory about these tariffs, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, that won't really do these small businesses any good. So let the big businesses fight it out. And don't allow the Googles and the Apples to buy their way out of it. In the Civil War, there was an old saying. It was a rich man's war, but a poor man's fight. Meaning the rich men could buy their way out of the draft. Rich man's war, poor man's fight. So big business of a war, but it's going to be fought by small businesses on Main Street who are going to be the victims. Those are always the casualties. And they've been drafted into this battle of big businesses. So again, I appreciate the comments of the gentleman from Ohio. I think he's wrong. I think we should exempt small businesses and let them know that they are not going to be driven out of business by this still unplanned guided missile heading right towards every main street in our country that's going to be destructive of the hard-earned success those small businesses have had. With that, Mr. President, I yield back.
Senator from Ohio.
Real quickly, and again, I truly respect my colleague and his point of view. I want to remind him that there was a great Massachusetts residents, family, that hasn't felt. You know what they used to do, or they still do. The brothers created a company called Hasbro. Those toys used to be made in the United States of America. They were employing lots of American citizens, and they shipped all that production to China and elsewhere. And communities suffered as a result. As I said, and if you notice, my colleague did not address any of the points that I made, because if you talk to any small business owner, you'll tell them the number one priority right now is for us to make their tax rates permanent. It's not a tax cut. No matter how many times my colleagues will say it's a tax cut for billionaires, it's objectively not true. This is permanency of the current rates. Only in Washington, D.C., by the way, would keeping things the same be considered a tax cut. It's ludicrous, and it makes no sense. And since you asked for the plan, here's the plan. We're going to make America the best place to do business. We're going to give American companies and American citizens the best tax rates so they can grow and thrive here. We're going to give them a regulatory environment that's not overbearing, that doesn't kneecap companies. We're going to make certain we protect critical industries like steel, which I appreciate that. I think we should put, by the way, a full tariff on all major steel products, like, for example, appliances. This country was once the epicenter of appliance manufacturing, and now there's only one company, Whirlpool, which I'm proud makes their appliances primarily in Ohio, and yet they have to compete with cheap appliances coming in from China. We have a plan. The plan is very simple. We're going to have fair and reciprocal trade. And you're right, it's not just China. It is Japan that charges us tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and we allow them to bring their products here. South Korea, not only is that the case, but we also pay to defend them. Australia, great ally, great people. They tariff our meat. Their meat can come in tariff-free. Canada and Mexico, great allies, large trading partners, but they've allowed their borders to be opened. They've allowed hundreds of thousands of Americans to die of fentanyl. I'm ecstatic that we have a president of the United States that says, no, we will not allow that to continue. And if you want to have a relationship with the United States of America, you're going to secure your borders, and you're going to make darn well necessary to secure your borders to protect American citizens. So that's the plan. The plan is to usher in a golden age for this country, where working class Americans have the ability to live a good life, have a good job where a mom or a dad can provide for their kids, afford a home, afford a car, go on vacation every once in a while, and retire with dignity. That was once the dream of the Democrat Party. This is what we should unite around and rally around and make certain that all of our policies are pointed straight in that direction. So again, I appreciate the comments from my colleague. Hopefully, I think we can work together on some initiatives, as I laid out, good tax policy, good regulatory policy, good workforce policies that allow small businesses to thrive. Because as somebody who did that 5 months ago for my whole entire life, I am happy to hear that conversation happening here in the United States Senate. And with that, I yield the floor.